Keeper of the Lost Cities, Exile, Chapter 47. Sophie squinted as the shimmering city of Eternalia glittered into view. In the distance, the jeweled buildings glinted in the sunshine, and members of the nobility trawled the streets in all their finery. But Sophie inhaled a blast of fate fuel and turned the other way, crossing the glassy river lined with piers, special trees with fan-shaped leaves that filtered the air, and heading toward the row of 12 identical crystal castles with twisted, swirling spires, the offices of the counselors. The low heels she'd worn cut into the sides of her toes, but Sophie was so relieved to be in her clothes that didn't smell like curdle roots that she didn't mind dressing noble. She had to shower 3 times to get the stench out of her hair. "You haven't explained what we are doing here," Sandor said, his hand poised over his weapon as he scanned the path ahead. "Technically, you never said I had to tell you everything, just that I would let you come." Sandor scowled, but didn't argue. She made her way to the farthest castle on the end, and the front door swung open before they reached the top step. Councillor Terrick stepped onto the shimmering landing, his face stretched with a wide smile as he said, "Always a pleasure to see you, Miss Foster. And I forgot about the bodyguard. Is that going to be a problem?" "Not at all, though I must admit it's been a long time since I've done an assignment with so little information up front. It's okay, Sophie. I understand that you don't know me well enough to open up to me like you did Alden. Yet, I'm happy to earn that trust for now." He held his pathfinder up to the light and offered Sophie his hand. "You ready?" She willed her palms not to be clammy as Sandor took her other hand and she asked, "Where are we going?" Councillor Terrick smiled. "You'll see." "Mysterium?" Sophie asked, as they reappeared on the familiar narrow streets lined with identical buildings. "What better place to keep our storage?" Councillor Terrick's tone implied no insult, but the snobby words still made Sophie cringe. At least she wasn't the only one getting stares and whispers as they made their way down the street, though the reaction seemed to be verging on panic this time. "Why is the councillor here? Is there something they haven't told us? Is it safe?" Councillor Terrick frowned as the majority of the crowd dug out of their way and rushed inside. Only a few strangers remained, watching them with wary eyes. "I hadn't realized the fear had spread this far," he mumbled. "I rarely walk among the masters like Bronte and Kendrick do. This must be why they're pushing so hard for the Alicorn's relocation." Sophie watched her mother drag her 2 children into the nearest building. "Do you really think a sparkly flying horse is going to be help?" "You'd be surprised at how powerful hope can be, Sophie." Actually, she knew that firsthand. "Please let it be here," she whispered as they turned down a narrow alley and stepped at a building no different from any of the others, with a rune on the plain grey door that Sophie couldn't read. Councillor Terrick placed his palm against a small black panel next to the rune, and the door clicked open. "I haven't inspected any of this myself, but I've been assured that everything brought out of the Forbidden Cities was moved here." She nodded, her mouth suddenly dry, as she stepped into the dimly lit room. It felt like stepping backward in time. She walked a few steps forward, past her old couch and coffee table, and the old TV that didn't get very many channels, but her dad refused to get rid of as long as it was working. Ahead was the hallway that led to the kitchen, and to the right were the stairs that led to the bedrooms. It was like the elves had carved out the inside of her old house and moved it there, right down to the carpet and the paint. But they couldn't do that, could they? "I didn't realize they took everything," she whispered. "Of course they did. We had no way of knowing if anything was important. Though as far as we could tell, there's nothing significant here." Sophie hoped that wasn't the case as she climbed the stairs and made her way down the hall to her old bedroom. She half expected to see Marty, her parents' fluffy grey cat, curled up outside her door, but the place was empty and dusty, and had clearly not been visited in a very long time, which made her sadder than she wanted to admit. She reached for the handle of her door, hesitating before turning the knob. "Everything okay?" Counselor Derrick asked. "Yeah, it's just, can I have a few minutes alone?" As the words left her mouth, she realized she'd basically just asked a member of the council to go away. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's okay," Counselor Derrick told her with a smile. "Take all the time you need." Sandor looked like he wanted to stay, but Counselor Derrick placed a hand on his shoulder, and Sandor sighed, saying, "I'll be right downstairs." "Thanks," she whispered, as they walked away. The heavy footsteps echoed through the quiet space, and Sophie couldn't help smiling when she heard the crouched springs creak, trying to imagine a goblin and elven royalty lounging in her old living room. Then she squared her shoulders and turned the doorknob and stumbled inside, not daring to look until the door was safely closed behind her. Her jaw dropped slightly. Every tiny detail of her room had been precisely recreated, right down to the way she used to arrange her stuffed animals by height, though there was a gap where Ella should have been. She sank into the bed, running her hands over the tattered blue and yellow quilt her mom had made for her. The fabric felt coarser than the elven fabric she was used to now, and she could see the stain from the time she'd spilled orange juice as a kid. But she still wanted to curl up in a ball and bury her face in it. She hadn't realized how much she'd left. Textbooks and notebooks, and trophies and ribbons from her days in human schools, tacky knickknacks and figurines her parents had given her over the years, silly crafts she'd made with her mom and sister, books she'd read so many times the bindings were creased and frayed, though they looked a bit ridiculous now, with their wizards and dragons and demigods on the cover. In fact, everything looked ridiculous, dull and dusty and completely useless, at least in a new world of power and light. It was hard not to feel just as useless. She clutched her registry pendant, proof that despite her differences, this world was where she belonged. Then she stood, smoothing the wrinkles she'd left on the bed, and focusing on the reason she was there. She pulled open the bottom drawer of her desk, coughing as bits of dust and cat hair erupted in a plume. It was stuffed with notebooks and old school projects and cell phone chargers, and she was starting to worry it wasn't there when her fingers brushed against the scratchy edge of something covered in glitter. She couldn't help smiling when she saw the hot pink cover with sparkly unicorns staring at her. Their purple eyes and rainbow manes and tails were almost as absurd as the rainbow walkways they were posed on or the floating hearts in the sky. She wanted to pore over it page by page, but she wasn't sure how long she could keep. Counselor Derrick waited. As she turned to leave, a small part of her wanted to take more, keep a few more memories and things that were her. But was this her? Or was this just her past? She glanced around again, then left everything behind. "Is that what you were looking for?" Counselor Derrick asked as she came down the stairs. He pointed to the journal she'd been hugging to her chest, and she nodded. "Can I see it?" Sophie froze. "It's okay," he promised. "I just want to satisfy my own curiosity, nothing more. In fact," he reached up and removed his circlet and held it out to her. "Let's trade. For the next few minutes, consider me a citizen." Her grip tightened on the journal, and her head screamed for her to keep it a secret. But he trusted her enough to bring her there without question. Couldn't she do the same? Besides, any runes she'd written would be the Black Swan cipher. She doubted he'd be able to translate. Still, her hands shook as she took his circlet and gave him the journal. She stared at her warped reflection, the enormous emeralds, as he flipped through the pages, and then flipped through them again and again. He finally laughed. "Well, as far as I can tell, other than being a rather humorous glimpse of how much your younger sister drove you crazy, there's nothing insignificant here. Though there are a few pages missing toward the end." He held out the journal, pointing to scraps of torn paper running along the inner spine. She had no memory of tearing those out. Tears burned her eyes, but not sad tears, angry tears. "I'm guessing you don't want to tell me what you were hoping to find," Counselor Derrick asked quietly. "Remember, the crown's still off." "It doesn't matter. It's not there." She tried not to imagine Mr. Folkley's chubby, wrinkled body, skulking around her house when she wasn't home, tearing out the pages. Or maybe she had been home. An image of him looming over her while she slept filled her mind. When else would he erase her memories? "Are you okay, Miss Foster?" Sandor asked as she started to sway. Mr. Folkley may have cared that day in Paris, but he'd also messed with her life in so many creepy, unimaginable ways. She had to get out of here. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said as she handed Counselor Terrick his circlet, fumbled for her own crystal. "Any time, Sophie. And don't forget this." He held out her old journal. Sophie couldn't make herself take it. Sandow grabbed it for her, and Sophie tried to act normal as she held her crystal to the light, but inside she was panicking. The Black Swan had stolen more than her memories when they tore out those pages. They'd stolen her only lead to save Alden.